This video will be about RSpec and test-driven development. We're going to implement a factorial program using a test-driven approach. If you want to know more about RSpec, just check out Google, Wikipedia articles, and go to their website. So assuming you already have RSpec and Ruby already installed. If not, you can simply do gem install RSpec. If you get any problems with permission, you still do. I already have RSpec here, so I can just run it. So what is test-driven development? So the approach is, first we're going to write tests, and then we're going to see those tests fail. And our goal is to implement or program, write our code so that the tests pass. So it's a little different from writing tests after already having developed a program. So first you write the tests and then you develop that program. So let's get started. We're going to do a factorial program. So factorial of a number, if you don't remember, for example 4 factorial 4, that's going to be 4 times 3 times 2 times 1. And that's going to be 24. Okay, so the factorial of a number is just number times the factorial of that number minus 1, and keep going in that fashion until you reach a base case of either 1 or 0. For the base case, the factorial of 1 is 1, and if you want a factorial of 0, that's also going to be 1, just in case you handle that case. So in this case here, we're going to get 4 times 3 times 2 times 1, because factorial of 1 is just 1, and then you just evaluate that, and that's just 24. So that's the factorial. So we're going to implement this program. So I'm going to create a file called factorial.rb. In the current directory here, I've already opened my text editor. I'm using Atom. Okay, so first thing I'm going to do is let's set up our spec here, our test. So what you're going to do is you're going to create a directory called spec. That's where our spec is going to look for all the tests. So make a directory RSpec. Let's go there. Okay, so what you're going to do now is we're going to create a file, and it's going to be the same name as we had before, except you're adding an underscore spec to the end of the file name right before RB. So in this case, it's going to be factorial space spec.rb, because this is a spec file. This is a test file for our spec. So I touched that file. Now we have a spec folder with factorial spec.rb there. So this is where we're going to write our tests. So we start writing our tests in this file, factorial spec. So the first thing you typically do is you need to require relative whatever file you're testing. In this case, we have a factorial.rb, which we want to implement. So we're going to pull up the implementation from that file. So we're going to say require relative, and I have to give a path. Since it's the one level up, I say // then factorial. I don't need to say the .rb extension. I can just say factorial like this. So this is going to require this file here in our test file, so we can use it to test. So for RSpec, you start off making a describe block. So let's describe factorial, and then you pass a Ruby block to that. And inside the describe, you're going to have the it blocks, which will be the actual tests. Okay, so let's say factorial, it computes the factorial of 0. Then you pass another Ruby block here, and that's where the actual test is going to take place. This is a unit test using the it. So what do you want to do when you do test-driven development is first you want to take a look at the simplest case you can think of to test your application, to test your functionality of. In this case, I know that the base case for the factorial is 0 or 1. So let's start with 0. We know factorial of 0 is 1, right? So this is our test. It is going to test if our function successfully computes the factorial of 0. So what you're going to say is we expect the factorial, the call to the function we're trying to implement, to and you pass 0, we expect that to equal 1, right? So this is how you write it in RSpec. This is the basic RSpec test. So you have to describe whatever method or function you're trying to test, and then you have the it to which is the actual unit test. So here it computes a factorial of 0, referring to this factorial method that we are going to write. And then we expect the call to that method with the argument 0 to give us a result that is going to be 1. So expect this function call here with this argument dot 2 equals 1. So see, RSpec reads much like English, and that's why it's so popular. It has become a very popular testing suite. But don't be fooled about all these it and describes. They're just Ruby methods. It's nothing fancy going on here. They're just called, they're methods whose names look like English, and this is the argument to the describe method, and then you're passing a Ruby block. The same with the it. It is a method name. You pass this argument, it's just a string to describe whatever you're testing, and then you pass another Ruby block, and then there's the expect method, and then you chain that with another method called the to, passing these arguments and so on. So don't be fooled by that. It's just syntax. It's just naming that makes it look like it's not really Ruby, but it's actually Ruby. So let's keep going. So we got our test written, the first test. So how do we run a test? Go back to the terminal. What we're going to say is we're going to say simply RSpec. So if I just say RSpec is going to go to the spec folder and look for the tests there and execute those tests. Okay, and I forgot to go to the root directory of our application. There's no examples because I'm inside RSpec, so go back to wherever you were before, do ls, there RSpec, there's a spec file, now run RSpec. So make sure to run RSpec from one level up from where the spec file is. Okay, so this is what RSpec told us. Okay, F means failure. One failure here. So Factorial computes the factorial of 0. Failure. So we got a no method error. So what does that mean? That means we don't have a method called Factorial. So we can simply fix that. And this is how we start doing our test-driven development. First we run the test, and then we try to fix that problem. And then you run the test again. So let's fix the problem. So there's no method called Factorial. So let's define it. Here's in Factorial RRB. We got Factorial. And then we define the method, right? Now let's go back to the test and run it again. Okay, so now we have a different kind of test error. Different kind of error. That's argument error. Wrong number of arguments. So it seems we provided one argument where our function definition only takes no parameters at all. And that makes sense, right? If you go back to our file, there's no arguments, no parameters. So let's add n here. So what we're going to do is I'm going to take a number, say n4, and I'm going to return the factorial of that number in this method here. So let's save this and go back, run the test again. Okay, now we got a different kind of error going on here. So it executed this. We expected to get 1 from the return value of the function, of the method Factorial, but we got nil. And why did we get nil? Because there's nothing defined in the method. So we have to define something. So to make the test pass, let's just give it what it wants, which is 1. So let's just return 1. Okay, now remember Ruby has implicit return, so I can just omit the return keyword because the last evaluated expression in the method is return. So I can just say this, and let's see how it goes. So one example, 0 failures. So our test passed, right? Just by simply adding that. But obviously that's not the right method, right? But that's the goal of test-driven development. You start off with a simple test, make that pass, and then you're going to write more tests. That's what we're going to do next. I'm going to write more tests and see it fail, and then I'm going to fix that, go back to our definition and fix that. But now before we do that, you see that my RSpec displays everything in the same color, so I kind of don't like that. Also, when I do when all my tests pass, it doesn't show me what actually passed, so I don't know what exactly. But in this case, I only have one example, but I could have many examples, right? So what we're going to do is we're going to set up some a dot file for RSpec. So in the current folder, I'm going to create the .rspec file, and that's going to hold some settings for RSpec. So the first setting I want you to add is the color setting. So let's go here and change that. We're going to say -- color. So what that does is adds color to our RSpec output. There you go, now it's green. Great. If it failed, it'll be red. That's nice. Now, I still want to know what actually passed. So let's do -- format documentation. Okay. Now see what happens. It tells me, oh, factorial computes a factorial of 0. This test passed. It's green. So that's a much nicer output. So that's a .rspec file. It has to be in the current root directory of whatever application you're working on. You can also move the .rspec to your home directory, which is tilde, to make that some sort of global setting so you don't have to create a .rspec file every time. Anyways, I'm just going to leave it here in this current folder. So now that we're all good set up for RSpec, we wrote our first test. Now let's try writing another test now. Let's go to RSpec. Let's do another one. We did 0, but let's do 1. Computes the factorial of 1. Do. Then there, expect call to the function factorial argument 1, 2 equals 1, right? Because factorial 1 is 1. Now let's run the test. Okay, still good, right? Now let's go back, write another test. Computes the factorial of 2. Then we expect the call to the method giving an argument 2, 2.2 equals what? 2 times 1 is just 2, so that's the factorial of 2. Now let's run the test. Oh, fail. And that's good, actually. That's how test-driven development works. So we expected 2, but got 1, and why is that? Because our method is defined in such a way that always returns 1. So we got to figure out a way to return 2. Well, the other option. So let's say like return 1 if n is either 0 or 1, because that makes sense, right? Because factorial of 0 or 1 is just 1. I could say like this. That's totally fine. But I'm just going to say like this. Assuming that given an integer greater, I'm assuming it's an integer that's greater than or equal to 0. That's passed to the function, so I don't care about the negatives. So I'm just going to return 1 if n is less than or equal to 1. So let's see that one. Yeah, everything is good. It's just the 2. Now, okay, let's go and make it pass for 2. So return 1 if it's or input is less than or equal to 1. Otherwise, just return 2, right? You can just say like that. So let's go and see the test pass. Great. Now we're ready to write another test. So let's go. It computes the factorial of 3. Do. And then there, expect factorial of 3. 2 equals what? 3 times 2 times 1 is 6. So that's the factorial of 3, right? Now let's run the test. It failed. Expected 6, but got 2. So test-driven development. Let's make the test pass. Now, what can I do here? I could say, if I give 3 times, I could say n times 2. How about that? Oh, it doesn't work. Let's see. How can I make this pass? N equals 1. You could just say, think of some way to make it pass. You can say just an if, return 2 if n equals 2, or just return 3 and keep going that fashion. That's one way, or you could find a fancier way. Anyways, let's try it out. Oops, I'm sorry. 6 here. So make it pass. And I could keep going like that and improving my method so it will pass each test and so on. You get the point. So let's add another test. Factorial 4. 4 times 6, 24. Right? Now a test fails. So keep going like that. So I'm gonna stop here. I'm gonna start writing the function, the method for real, right? Well, we keep adding tests here and go and start with the first test that fails and try to fix that and keep going that faction. So 5 times 24, 120. Just gonna copy that. 6, 720, right? Just multiply 6 times 120, that's 720. It computes the factorial 7. Expect factorial 7 to equals. Okay, what is that? That's 7 times 720. What is that? See my calculator here. 7. Oops. 50, 40. Okay, I'm not gonna write any more tests. You get the point. So let's run the tests. RSpec got a lot of failures. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna go to the first test and make it pass. When you make that pass, run the test again, and then go to the next test and proceed in that fashion. In this case, I'm gonna just write the function for real. So let's do it. So the first line is pretty good. We know that's the base case. Factorial of 1 or 0 is gonna be 1. But then what do we do if it's not that? Well, what we could do is like keep track of a product and keep multiplying the number with the number -1 until we reach 1. We can do that with many ways. You can do a for loop, can do an until, or even use times, but I will just use a while loop. So let's keep track of product. I'm going to initialize it to 1. And then I'm going to have an index to loop through. So index is going to be started at n, because I will start the factorial from the number itself, right? So n is going to be, for example, so past 4, n is going to be 4 initially. So I want to keep decreasing n. The next time is going to be 3, 2, 1, up the way to 1, right? So when n reaches 1, that's when I want to stop. And I want to keep track of this product inside the products variable, product here. So let's do while the index is greater than 1. What we're going to do is, okay, we're going to say the product, just multiply the index to whatever the product is holding. And then I'm going to decrement the index. I don't want an infinite loop, and I want to make sure I reach the base case 1 here. It goes decreasing. So, and then finally, you want to return the actual result, right? So we can just return product or just implicitly return like this. And that's going to be the factorial. So let's test it out. All the tests pass. We have successfully written our factorial. We could add on more tests and see if somehow it would fail eventually, but I think we're pretty good. You can try and add tests for 8, 9, and 10, and so on, or even find a better way to write tests and just repeat ourselves here. I'm sure you can find a better way to write something that's less repetitive, may dry up your code and so on. So this is factorial. So we take in the number. We know the base case is factorial of 0 or factorial of 1 is going to be 1. So that's what the first line is doing. Otherwise, it's going to do this. Just keep a track of a product and initialize the index to the given number. And we want to make the index decrement all the way up to 1 because we know factorial of 1 is just 1. And then we just keep multiplying the index with the current value of the product and then subtract that. Here I could even refactor this to be more shorten it. I could just use a shortcut. This is the same thing we had before, like shortcut operators here. So you just move whatever operator to the left of the equal sign. That's the same thing as saying product equals product times index, and index equals index minus 1. That's a shorter way. And then finally we return the product, which is going to hold the factorial of the given number n. Now let's run a test to make sure I didn't break with my refactoring of the loop body. So everything's okay. So that is it. Let's just review what we did. We started learning how to do test-driven development or behavior-driven development using RSpec, a very popular testing suite for Ruby. And it reads much like English. And the important keywords to know when you first start out is the describe keyword. Typically, you want to describe and give it a method name to describe, to give some tests, and all those unit tests are going to be described using an it block. So it, and just use an expect to expect some function return value to be something. There are other ways of testing. You can Google RSpec cheat sheet, and that gives you a lot of things. RSpec cheat sheet. So look into that. This guy has one good one here. It's pretty good. All the different things you can do RSpec are all here. And then don't forget to require relative in the beginning. Typically, if you write a test and put each test file inside the spec folder so that RSpec knows where to look for those things, because it always looks in the spec folder. Always add the suffix _RSpec to the file name. And if you want more settings, use the .rspec file in the root of the application with -- color -- format documentation. Okay, this is it for an introduction to RSpec and test-driven development in Ruby. I hope you liked my video, and please subscribe. I'd really appreciate that. And any comments, suggestions, please leave below. And have a good day.